Every night at exactly 2:14 a.m., the most feared man in New York called just to hear me say hello. He fell in love with my voice in the dark. Then he saw my face, and the secret I had been hiding broke something inside him. But before any of that, before the name Enzo Salvatore meant anything to me except danger, I was only Operator 7. Booth 7, 34th floor, blue glass walls that turned Manhattan into a smear of gold and static after midnight, cold coffee in a paper cup, a cheap black headset that pinched behind my ears by hour 6, and underneath my keyboard, folded so many times the creases had gone soft, a hospital bill with my brother's name on it. I worked for a company called Confidant. If you've never heard of it, that's the point. Confidant is an ultra-exclusive encrypted listening service. Clients pay obscene monthly fees for one single guarantee, that somewhere, at any hour, a calm and forgettable voice will answer the phone and listen without judgment. Our clients were the kind of people who couldn't afford to be overheard anywhere else. Billionaires, politicians, hires to companies you've bought something from this week. And sometimes, men whose names you would never want to know. We were trained never to ask names, never to ask locations, never to search a client's identity, even if we recognized the voice from the news. Silence was the actual product we sold. Our voices were only the packaging. I was good at it. I was good at being warm and steady and forgettable, because I had spent my whole life learning how to sound calm while everything underneath me was on fire. That night, the night that changed everything, I almost didn't answer. It was 2:13 a.m. My eyes were sandpaper. I had already logged 9 calls, a senator's wife who cried about her marriage, a tech founder who wanted to talk about his childhood dog, a woman who just breathed for 11 minutes and then hung up without a word. Then, at 2:14 a.m., exactly, a new codename lit up my screen, Il Lupo, the wolf. I remember thinking, of course someone would pick that name. I almost rejected the call. My hand actually hovered over the red button. Instead, I answered. Confident private line, I said, soft even, professional, you're safe here. There was a pause, then a voice, low, Italian accented, controlled in the way that only truly dangerous men are controlled, answered. No one is safe here. I heard a chair scrape against marble somewhere on his end. I heard a man breathing too fast, too shallow, the way people breathe when they know something terrible is about to happen to them. I heard, very faintly, someone whispering what sounded like a prayer in Italian. My whole body went cold. There is a man kneeling in front of me, Il Lupo said, like he was describing the weather. He stole from me. He sold my name to people who would very much like to see me dead. I didn't say anything. My training told me to stay silent, to let the client fill the space. Give me one reason, he said, not to make him disappear. I should have disconnected the call right there. That's what the manual says. Any explicit threat of violence, you terminate immediately. No explanation, no goodbye. I didn't disconnect. I don't know why. Maybe it was Milo's hospital bill under my keyboard. Maybe it was 3 years of listening to powerful men explain, in 100 different voices, why the terrible thing they were about to do was actually justified. If you really wanted him gone, I said, you wouldn't be asking a stranger for a reason. Silence. A long, dangerous silence, the kind that has weight to it. I kept going because some reckless part of me had already decided I was already dead if I stopped now. You didn't call because of him, I said. You called because some part of you is tired of being the only monster in the room. For 3 full seconds, I believed I had just handed a killer the exact words he needed to find me and end me. Then I heard him exhale. And then, in a voice gone suddenly quiet, he said to someone else in the room, "Let him go." I heard footsteps, a door, a man's ragged breathing fading into relief. And then it was just the two of us again, connected by a wire and a lie neither of us had told yet. "What is your name?" Il Lupo said. It wasn't a question. It was a demand dressed as one. "I can't tell you that," I said. "It's against policy," he repeated, like the word amused him. Yes, there was a pause. And then, almost gently, almost like it cost him something to say it softly, "Then I will call you Voice." Voice. Because your voice, he said, just stopped me from becoming something I couldn't come back from. The call ended 2 minutes later. 9 minutes total. I sat there in my cheap headset with my hands shaking, and I thought, I will never hear from that man again. I was wrong. When my shift ended, I rode the train back to Queens with my forehead against the cold window, watching the city blur past like something underwater. Our apartment was small, 1 bedroom, a couch that pulled into a second bed, a radiator that clanked like it was arguing with itself. But it was ours, and it was warm. And Milo was asleep on the couch when I walked in, one hand resting flat over his own chest, like he was checking that his heart was still doing its job. His sneakers sat on the floor beside the couch, laces still tied. "You sleep with your shoes next to you like that's normal," I'd told him once. "Emergencies don't wait for shoelaces," he'd said. Completely serious. 12 years old and somehow already smarter than every adult I knew. I sat on the edge of the couch and brushed his hair back. His medicine bottles were lined up on the side table next to a plastic cup of water, exactly the way the discharge nurse had shown us. Milo cracked one eye open. "You're late," he said. "I'm on time." "You're just awake when you shouldn't be." "I have the heart of an old man," he said. "Old men don't sleep well." "You have the heart of a very expensive 12-year-old, I said. He grinned. "That's my brand now. The one with the expensive heart. I'm putting it on a t-shirt." I kissed his forehead. His skin was warm, too warm, and for one horrible second my whole body braced for a fever that wasn't there. "I talked to Dr. Patel today," I said carefully. "We're going to figure out the surgery. All of it, I promise." Milo looked at me with the kind of patience only sick kids seem to develop early, the patience of someone who has learned that adults lie gently and often. "You always say that," he said. "Because I always do," I said. "Handle it. That's my whole job." He didn't argue. He just closed his eyes again, one hand still resting over his heart, like he was holding something fragile in place until morning. I didn't tell him about the debt. I didn't tell him about Victor Drago. 6 months earlier, when Milo's medication needed adjusting and the insurance company decided a life-saving prescription was not medically necessary at this time, I had borrowed $5,000 from a man a coworker introduced me to. Quiet money, she'd called it. No paperwork, no waiting. $5,000 had become, through fees and penalties and interest that seemed to multiply on its own schedule, something closer to $60,000. Victor Drago was polished the way a knife is polished. Charcoal suits, soft voice, the kind of stillness that made violence feel unnecessary because you could already feel what he was capable of without him lifting a hand. He was waiting for me outside my building 3 nights after that first call with Il Lupo. "Alina," he said, like we were old friends. "I don't have it yet," I said. "I know," he said. "That's not why I'm here tonight." He fell into step beside me, easy, unhurried, and told me, almost conversationally, that a security analyst inside Confidant had sold him something interesting. "He can't hear the calls," Victor said. "The encryption's real, I'll give your company that. But metadata is a different animal. Client code names, call times, operator numbers. There's a client," he continued, "who calls at exactly 2:14 every morning. Only ever operator 7. That's you, isn't it, Alina?" I said nothing, which he took correctly as confirmation. "Il Lupo," Victor said, testing the name like a wine he wasn't sure he liked. "We believe he's connected to the Salvatore organization. Possibly Salvatore himself. You're going to find out." "I can't," I said. "I can't ask him anything. I can't even ask his name." "You'll find a way," Victor said. "His identity, his real name. Where he goes, what he's afraid of." "No." Victor smiled, and that was somehow worse than if he'd raised his voice. "People think lives end with bullets," he said. "Sometimes a form disappears instead. Sometimes a grant application gets lost. Sometimes a surgery slot gets rescheduled for administrative reasons nobody can quite explain. Sometimes medication ships one day too late." He reached into his coat and pulled out a photograph. Milo, walking out of the hospital with Dr. Patel, taken from across the street, close enough that I could see the small gap in his front teeth when he laughed at something. 48 hours, Victor said, and walked away like he hadn't just held my brother's life in his hand and squeezed. I went upstairs. I did not sleep. At 2:14 the next night, my screen lit up. Il Lupo. I answered on the first ring. Confident private line. You answer before the second ring, he said, cut me off. Every time. I hadn't realized he'd noticed. Maybe I'm afraid of what happens if I don't, I said, before I could stop myself. To whom? I didn't answer. There are some truths you can't afford to hand a stranger, even one whose voice has started to feel less like a stranger's. That call lasted 16 minutes. He talked about betrayal in the abstract. Never names, never places. The way you talk around a wound you can't look at directly. You speak to wolves, he said at one point, like you've never been bitten. No, I said. I speak like I have. He went quiet at that. I heard, faintly, opera playing somewhere behind him, a woman's voice climbing something in Italian, aching and furious at once. What is that music? I asked. Puccini, he said. Turandot, a story about a woman who kills any man who cannot answer her riddles. Charming, I said. I find it honest, he said. Most love stories pretend cruelty isn't part of the arrangement. This one admits it. Do you believe that? I asked. That love and cruelty come as a package? There was a long silence. I did, he said finally, until recently. I told Victor 3 days later that Il Lupo might work in finance. Middle-aged, I said, paranoid about employee theft. I gave him just enough truth to look like effort and just enough fog that none of it could be traced anywhere real. I was buying time. I didn't know yet that I was also, slowly, buying myself a reason to keep answering that call every night even when I was exhausted enough to cry. The calls became a ritual. 9 minutes, 16, 31, once 42. Sometimes he called furious, his voice clipped and low, and I'd hear men's voices in the background go suddenly, completely silent, the way a room goes quiet when someone dangerous walks through it. Sometimes he called exhausted, and he'd just breathe for a while before he said anything at all. Sometimes he said nothing for the entire 9 minutes, and I learned to just sit there with him, because some silences need witnesses, not solutions. I learned things about him without ever learning his name. He didn't sleep well. He hated performative loyalty. Men who smiled too easily, who agreed too fast. He was surrounded by people at all times and trusted almost none of them. And underneath the coldness, there was something that frightened him more than any enemy, the fear of becoming cruel simply because it had stopped requiring effort. "You're the only person who doesn't want something from me," he told me once. "I don't know what you have," I said. "That probably helps. Rocco wants my approval," he said. "My men want my protection. My enemies want my throat. You just want to hang up on time so you don't get in trouble with your supervisor." "That's not entirely true," I admitted. "No, I also want to know if you slept today." There was a pause, and then, the first time I ever heard it, something that might have been the beginning of a laugh. 4 hours, he said. A personal record. He, in turn, learned things about me. That I was young. That I was tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. That I understood debt the way you only understand it from the inside. That somewhere, someone powerful had hurt me, because I flinched, verbally, at any mention of men who called control by the name of care. And that I loved someone. Fiercely. Someone I would not name. "You have someone," he said one night. It wasn't a question. "I do." "Who taught you to be afraid of powerful men?" he asked. "Life," I said. He didn't push. That mattered more than he probably realized. A man who could have traced my line in an hour, who had resources most governments don't have, chose instead to simply let my silence stand. I didn't understand yet that this restraint was the whole story. That a man like him choosing not to take something was, for him, a kind of confession. Milo's condition got worse in the ordinary cruel way these things do, not with an alarm, but with small signs that added up into something undeniable. He got tired climbing the stairs to our apartment. His lips went faintly blue on cold mornings. He stopped racing me to the mailbox, which was somehow the detail that scared me the most. Because Milo raced everyone to everything, it was practically his personality. Dr. Patel sat me down in her office, her voice careful in the way doctors get right before they say something they wish they didn't have to. "The 6-week window I gave you," she said. "It's gone. We're closer to 2 weeks now. Possibly less." "Possibly less," I repeated. "I need you to understand the deposit requirement isn't bureaucracy for its own sake," she said gently. "It's how the hospital allocates surgical resources. I wish it were different. I'm telling you the truth because you deserve it." I walked out of that office and somehow got myself to work, and somehow sat down in booth 7, and somehow put on my headset, and at 2:14 exactly, the screen lit up with his name. "Confident private line," I said. "You're." My voice cracked on the second word. I hadn't meant it to. 3 years of professional composure gone in a single syllable. "What happened?" Enzo said immediately. No preamble, no opera in the background tonight. "Nothing," I said. "Do not insult me," he said. "I have listened to your voice almost every night for weeks. I know its temperature. Something is wrong. I don't know why that was the thing that broke me. Not Victor's threats. Not the photograph. A stranger on a phone line noticing that my voice had a temperature. I have a brother," I said before I could stop myself. "He's 12. Go on." "Time has started asking for money," I said. "That's the only way I know how to say it." "Where?" Enzo said. "Just that. Where?" Panic hit me like cold water. "No," I said. "I can't tell you that. I can help." "Powerful men always say help," I said, my voice shaking now, "when they mean ownership." There was a silence on the line, long enough that I thought he might have hung up. "Who taught you that?" he asked quietly. "Life," I said again. And he didn't push. He didn't trace the call. He didn't send anyone. A man who could have found my address in an hour let a stranger's grief stay private because she asked him to. I told him about Milo instead. the safe parts, the parts that were mine to give. I told him Milo hated oatmeal with a passion that seemed disproportionate to the crime of oatmeal. I told him about the sneakers by the couch, tied and ready, because emergencies don't wait for shoelaces. I told him Milo wanted to be an architect and design children's hospitals that didn't look sad. Buildings with big windows and sunlight instead of fluorescent corridors that made everyone look half dead. 12 is too young, Enzo said finally, to be negotiating with death. He doesn't think of it that way, I said. He calls himself the one with the expensive heart, like it's a brand. For the first time since I'd known his voice, Enzo laughed, really laughed, short and surprised, like it had escaped before he decided to allow it. He sounds, Enzo said, like someone worth fighting for. That call lasted 42 minutes. It was the longest one yet. 2 nights later, Victor found me in the Confidant parking garage. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. His hand closed around my upper arm hard enough that I felt it for days afterward, a bruise blooming under my sleeve like a secret. 48 hours, he said, was generous. I'm not feeling generous anymore. I don't have anything, I said. He never tells me anything. Not his name, not where he is. Then bring him to a place I can see him, Victor said. Or repay everything. All of it, now. You know I can't. Then your brother's care, Victor said, releasing my arm slowly, almost gently, which was somehow more terrifying than if he'd shaken me, is about to become very complicated. I went home. Milo was awake, watching something on his tablet with the volume too low, the way he did when he thought I was tired and didn't want to bother me. He looked at my arm before I could pull my sleeve down. What happened, he said, and for one horrible second he sounded exactly like Enzo asking me the same question. I bumped into a door, I said. Milo looked at me for a long moment with those 2 observant eyes. 12 years old, and he already knew, on some level, that I was lying. He just didn't say so. Maybe he understood, in the way sick kids sometimes understand things early, that some lies are the only gift you have left to give someone. Okay, he said quietly, and went back to his show. My real phone rang an hour later. Not the confident line. My personal number, the one almost nobody had. Unknown caller. I answered, heart already hammering. Hello? Vos. I nearly dropped the phone. How do you? I couldn't finish the sentence. One of Victor Drago's men, Enzo said, attempted to sell information about a debt file to my intelligence network. Your number was inside it. Your name was inside it. Alina Voss. Hearing him say my real name felt like being undressed in the middle of a crowded room. You had no right, I said, my voice shaking with something that was equal parts fear and fury. You had no right to look. I did not look, he said. It came to me. That's not the same as you not crossing a line. Alina, he said, and my name and his voice did something to my chest I didn't have time to examine. Victor Drago is not simply collecting a debt from you. He is using you to find me. Who are you? I asked, the question I had wanted to ask for weeks finally forcing its way out. There was a pause. A man? Enzo said quietly. You should have stayed very far away from. The call ended. I sat on my kitchen floor with my back against the cabinet, phone still warm in my hand, and I didn't cry, because crying felt like a luxury I couldn't afford that night. 10 minutes later, a photograph arrived on my personal phone. Milo, leaving the hospital that afternoon, small and unaware, backpack slung over one shoulder. The message underneath said, choose the wolf or the boy. I didn't sleep at all. Confident announced the breach 2 days later. Someone had accessed the client database. Not the calls themselves, thank God, but enough metadata that the company's entire top tier of clients was at risk of exposure. All Tier 1 clients would be required to complete an in-person voice verification at Confidant's Manhattan headquarters. Standard security protocol, Celeste, my supervisor, explained, her voice tight with the particular stress of someone worried about losing very rich, very dangerous customers. I can't do verifications, I told her. I'm not trained for that. You are for this one, Celeste said. The client specifically requested Operator 7. By name, well, by number. He won't do it with anyone else. My stomach turned to ice. I can't, I said. Then you can explain to management why our highest tier client is threatening to terminate his contract, Celeste said, not unkindly but firmly. Alina, this isn't optional. That night, Victor was waiting outside my building again, as if he'd known before I did. I heard about the breach, he said, and the verification requirement. I'm not doing this for you, I said. You are, he said, and pressed something small and cold into my palm. A burner phone, thin as a credit card, meant to slip into a coat lining without a trace. You're going to walk into that room. You're going to look at his face. You're going to tell me his name, his security pattern, his location, anything useful. or Milo's surgery slot disappears the way certain forms tend to disappear. I stood there holding a device that could destroy the one thing I hadn't yet let Victor touch, and I understood with total clarity that I had run out of ways to protect everyone. The verification room was white and windowless and silent in a way that felt engineered, like even sound had been asked to leave its opinions at the door. 2 men stood near the wall. One had a scar running from his ear to his jaw, still and watchful in the specific way of men who have killed before and expect to again. And in the center of the room stood the man I had spent weeks memorizing without ever seeing. Black suit, dark hair, eyes the color of a storm that hasn't decided yet whether it's going to break. Every part of him radiated a stillness that wasn't calm. It was control. Absolute, practiced, dangerous control. I knew him instantly, the way you know a nightmare has become real. Il Lupo was Enzo Salvatore, the most feared mafia boss in New York, the exact man Victor Drago wanted. My legs almost didn't carry me the rest of the way into the room. "Verification protocol," I said, my voice barely holding together, reading from the card in my shaking hand. "Please confirm your registered client code." Enzo didn't answer right away. He was looking at me, not scanning me the way men usually look at a woman they don't know, but studying me, the way you study something you've been waiting to see for a long time and are afraid won't match the picture in your head. "Say that again," he said quietly. I cleared my throat. "Please confirm your registered client code." "Il Lupo," he said, his eyes never leaving my face. And then almost to himself, barely above a whisper, "Vos." For a long moment, neither of us said anything at all. I could hear my own heartbeat. I could feel him hearing it too, somehow, the way you can feel a held breath in a quiet room. "I knew a name," he said finally. "Elena Voss." I did not know this was the face behind it. "And I didn't know," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "that the wolf had a throne." Something flickered across his face. Not quite a smile, but its distant cousin. He turned to the 2 men. "Leave us." The scarred one, Rocco, I would learn later, hesitated for half a second before obeying. The door closed with a soft, final click. We were alone. "You're afraid," Enzo said. It wasn't an accusation. It was an observation, the kind a man makes when he's spent weeks learning to read a voice and can suddenly read the whole person. "I'm fine," I said. "You're lying," he said. "I've heard you lie before when you told me nothing was wrong. Your voice does something." A half-second delay before the second word. I felt exposed in a way I had never felt in my life. More naked standing, fully dressed in a white room than I would have felt anywhere else. "Elena," he said softer now. "What are you not telling me?" Before I could answer, before I could decide whether to tell him everything or nothing, a different door opened. Rocco stepped back in, his face grim, holding something in a gloved hand. The burner phone. Victor's burner phone. It had been transmitting the entire time, tucked into the lining of my coat, and somewhere in this fortress of a building, his security had caught the signal. "Boss," Rocco said, "this device is broadcasting to an external line. We traced the network signature." He didn't need to say whose network it was. I watched the exact moment Enzo understood, because I watched every trace of warmth leave his face like a light switching off. "Whose network, Rocco?" Enzo said, though I think he already knew. "Drago's," Rocco said. The silence that followed was worse than any shouting could have been. "How long?" Enzo said, turning to me. His voice had gone somewhere I hadn't heard before, flat, controlled, terrifyingly calm. "Enzo." "How long?" he repeated. "Have you been feeding him my calls?" "I never told him who you were," I said, desperate now, the words tumbling out too fast. "I swear to you, I never gave him your name. I gave him nothing real. I only—" "But you knew," he said. "You knew someone was hunting me. Before tonight. Before this room." I couldn't lie to him. Not now. Not with everything already collapsing. "Yes," I said. "And every night," he said, his voice dropping even lower, "you answered me anyway." Yes, that single word did something to him I will never forget. His jaw tightened. His eyes, which had looked at me minutes ago like I was something he'd been searching for, went distant and cold, like a door closing from the inside. "You were the one place," he said quietly. "I did not look for betrayal." "Please," I said, "let me explain." "Explain," he said, and it wasn't kindness, it was a command. So I told him everything. Victor Drago, the $5,000 loan that had metastasized into a debt I could never repay. Milo, his heart, the surgery he desperately needed, and the deposit I couldn't raise. The photograph of Milo leaving the hospital. The threat scrawled beneath it. "Choose the wolf or the boy." I told him about the bruise on my arm, about the 48 hours, about every single thing I had refused to tell him during our calls, not because I didn't trust him, but because I was terrified of what it would cost me if I did. When I finished, Enzo didn't speak for a long time. "A 12-year-old boy," he said finally, "with a heart condition." "Yes. And you carried this alone." "I didn't have a choice." "Everyone has a choice," he said, and something in his voice had shifted. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something adjacent to it. Understanding, maybe. Recognition. But he didn't reach for me. He didn't soften the way I desperately wanted him to. "I need to think," he said. "Rocco will make sure you get home safely. And he will make sure Victor Drago does not come near you again tonight." "Enzo, I trusted a voice in the dark," he said. "More than I have trusted anyone in 15 years. I need to understand what that trust was standing on." I left that room believing I would never hear his voice again. Not at 2:14. Not ever. I was wrong about that too, but it would take everything falling apart first. I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table with Victor's burner phone in front of me like a bomb that hadn't gone off yet. And I thought about everything Victor had said over the past months. Every detail he'd let slip while threatening me, the way men like him always do. Believing they're untouchable, believing the person they're threatening is too broken to be listening. A pharmaceutical distribution warehouse. He'd mentioned it twice, once complaining about the noise from the trains at 3 a.m., once mentioning a shipment schedule that ran every Thursday before the morning trucks, a warehouse near train tracks, a weekly medical distribution route. Victor Drago wasn't just laundering threats through debt collection. He was running something through legitimate medical supply chains, using the exact kind of system delays he'd threatened Milo with as his actual operation. I could have stayed hidden. I could have taken what I knew and disappeared into it, protected myself, waited for the danger to pass on its own. Instead, I went to Rocco. "I need to see him," I said. "I have something he needs to know." Rocco studied me for a long moment, the scar along his jaw pulling slightly as he considered. "He's not in a state to see you." "Then tell him," I said, "that Vose found his weakness." Something in Rocco's expression shifted. He made a call. 20 minutes later, I was standing in front of Enzo again, this time in a different room. An office, dark wood, a single lamp, a bottle of something amber untouched on the desk beside him. He looked exhausted in a way I recognized from 214 calls. Exhausted and guarded, the walls back up exactly where they'd been before the first time he'd ever called me Vose. "You said you found my weakness," he said, without preamble. "I did," I said. "A pharmaceutical warehouse, near train tracks. Weekly shipments, timed before the morning distribution trucks." Victor mentioned it more than once, thinking I was too frightened to be listening. Enzo went very still. "That's Drago's operational front," he said slowly. "We've been trying to locate it for 8 months." "I know," I said, "because I was supposed to find your weakness, and instead I found his." "Why?" Enzo said. "Would you give this to me? After tonight, after everything?" "Because you keep believing this was about trust," I said, "and it isn't." "What is it then?" "You think needing anyone makes you weak," I said. "That's what you actually believe. Not that I betrayed you. That letting yourself need my voice at 2:14 every night was the mistake in the first place." He didn't answer, but he didn't look away either. "That's your weakness," I said quietly, "not me. The belief that wanting something makes you smaller. You've spent so long being the only monster in the room that you don't know how to be a person who's allowed to need someone." For a long moment, Enzo Salvatore, the most feared man in New York, a man who had walked into rooms and walked out of them leaving other men on their knees, looked, for the first time since I'd met him, genuinely undone. "Vos still sees me," he said finally, quietly, almost to himself, more clearly than anyone who's ever actually looked at my face. That was the moment everything changed. Not with an apology. Not with forgiveness spoken aloud, but with the recognition, in his eyes, that I had never once used what I knew about him as a weapon, even when it would have saved me. The warehouse raid happened 4 nights later. I want to be honest about my role in it, because I think it matters. I am not a fighter. I have never held a gun in my life. My strength, if I have one, has always been in noticing, in listening to the small, careless details people let slip when they think no one's paying attention. I gave Enzo's people the layout I'd pieced together from Victor's own words. The train noise placed the building within a specific radius. The Thursday shipment schedule told them exactly when security would be thinnest. Distracted by loading routines, I wasn't in the room when the plan was finalized, and I shouldn't have been in the room when it happened at all. But Victor Drago had other plans for me. He found me outside the hospital, of all places, where I'd gone to check on Milo's pre-surgical blood work. His men were faster than I expected. and gentler than I would have guessed, in the specific way that terrifies you more than roughness would. The calm efficiency of men who do this often. I was in the back of a car before I fully understood what was happening. Victor sat across from me, unbothered, adjusting his cufflinks like we were headed to dinner. "You found my warehouse," he said. It wasn't a question. "Clever girl, I underestimated you." "Let me go," I said. "Milo's surgery is in 3 days. If anything happens to me, nothing will happen to you," Victor said, "as long as Enzo Salvatore understands what leverage actually means." We arrived at the warehouse itself, the very building I had helped identify, which felt like a cruelty designed specifically for me. Fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the distant rattle of a passing train shaking dust from the rafters, pallets of medical supplies stacked in rows that, in another life, might have been going somewhere to help someone like Milo. Enzo arrived 20 minutes later, and I have never in my life seen a man walk into danger with such total, terrifying calm. Rocco and a handful of Enzo's men fanned out along the warehouse's edges. Victor's people, fewer than I expected, held their ground near the loading dock. "Enzo Salvatore," Victor said, pleasant as ever, one hand resting on my shoulder in a way that made my skin crawl. Now I know what the wolf needs. Enzo's eyes moved to me, then back to Victor, and his expression didn't change at all. That stillness, the one that used to frighten me, now felt like the calm of a man who had already decided exactly how this ended. "No," Enzo said. "You know what I choose." "Semantics," Victor said. "No," Enzo said. "The difference between the two of us." What happened next moved fast, faster than I could fully track, but I remember the important pieces. Rocco created a distraction near the loading dock. A crash of pallets, shouting, a diversion just long enough that Victor's grip on my shoulder loosened as he turned to assess the noise. I didn't fight him. I didn't need to. I used the one weapon I actually had, the knowledge of that building's layout, which I had helped map from the details Victor himself had carelessly given me. I knew where the gap in the shelving was. I knew which row led toward the side exit Enzo's men had already secured. I moved. It wasn't heroic. It was just enough distance, enough time, enough space between Victor and me for Enzo's people to close in around him without me standing in the crossfire. I won't describe what happened to Victor Drago in detail. It wasn't clean, and it wasn't kind, but it was over quickly, and when it was over, the systems he had used to threaten a 12-year-old boy's medical care collapsed with him. The debt records, the falsified paperwork, the pharmaceutical front, all of it seized within hours. When it was safe, Enzo crossed the warehouse floor toward me, and for a moment neither of us moved. The old Enzo, the man from the verification room, the man who had once ordered someone to disappear because loyalty had been betrayed, would have grabbed me and pulled me against him without asking, claiming me the way he claimed everything, as a matter of course. Instead, he stopped just short of touching me. "Can I?" he said quietly. 2 words. The entire distance between the man he had been and the man he was becoming lived inside those 2 words. "Yes," I said. And then he held me, carefully, like something he was still learning how to hold without breaking. And I let myself cry for the first time in longer than I could remember. Into the shoulder of the most dangerous man in New York, who had just asked permission to comfort me. Milo's surgery was scheduled for 6 days later, and in the time between the warehouse and the operating room, Enzo did something I didn't expect. He didn't try to fix Milo's condition with money the way powerful men do in stories, waving away medical complexity like it was an invoice. He understood somehow that money alone doesn't cure a heart. Instead, he found Dr. Bellini, a cardiac specialist respected across 3 continents, a man who had, according to Dr. Patel, turned down consultations for people far more famous than my brother. "Tell me what the medicine needs," Enzo told Dr. Patel, standing in her small office with a stillness that made the room feel more serious, not less. "I will make sure nothing else blocks it. Nothing else stands in front of it. That's all I'm asking to be responsible for." Dr. Patel, who had seen a great many worried families walk through her door, looked at him for a long moment. "That," she said, "is the correct thing to ask." Milo met Enzo 2 days before the surgery, sitting up in his hospital bed with a tablet balanced on his knees and an IV line taped to the back of his hand. He looked Enzo up and down with the frank, unguarded assessment only a 12-year-old can get away with. "Are you paying for my heart?" Milo asked. "I am removing a delay," Enzo said. "That should never have been placed in front of it." Milo considered this. That sounds like rich person language, something that might have been the beginning of a smile pulled at the corner of Enzo's mouth. "Will Alina owe you?" Milo asked, suddenly serious. "No," Enzo said. "Will I?" "No." "Are you dangerous?" There was a pause. Enzo didn't lie to him. "Yes," he said. "To us?" "Never," Enzo said, and I believed him completely. Milo studied him a moment longer, then leaned forward as much as his IV line allowed. "If you make her cry," he said, pointing 2 fingers at his own eyes and then at Enzo, "I have hospital scissors, and I know where they keep them." "Understood," Enzo said gravely, as if he were being warned by a rival boss instead of a preteen in a hospital gown. And I loved him a little more in that exact moment than I had before. The morning of the surgery, I sat in the waiting room with my hands wrapped so tightly around a paper coffee cup that the sides had begun to buckle. Enzo sat beside me. He didn't fill the silence with false comfort. He didn't tell me Milo would definitely be fine, because he understood by then that I had spent my whole life being lied to gently by people who meant well, and that another gentle lie, even from him, would have broken something in me faster than the truth ever could. He just stayed. "I always tell him I'll handle everything," I said, staring at the closed double doors down the hall. "Can you?" Enzo asked. "Handle everything." I thought about the debt, the bruise Victor had left on my arm, the photograph of Milo outside the hospital. Every night I had answered a phone call from a dangerous stranger because some exhausted part of me had needed one place in my life that wasn't a battle. "No," I admitted, for the first time out loud. "I can't." "Then don't handle this part alone," Enzo said and took my hand. The surgery lasted 6 hours. I have never experienced time behave so strangely, stretching and compressing at once, every minute both an eternity and nothing at all. When Dr. Bellini finally came out, still in his surgical cap, his face composed but his eyes tired in the specific way of someone who has just spent hours holding a child's life carefully between his hands, I stood up so fast the coffee cup fell from my lap. "He's stable," Dr. Bellini said. "It went well. Better than well." I don't remember sitting back down. I remember Enzo's arm around me, steady, and I remember crying again, and I remember him not saying "I told you so," not saying anything at all except my name, quiet, over and over, like a small anchor. Milo survived. My brother, the one with the expensive heart, was going to be okay. In the weeks after Milo's surgery, once the adrenaline had faded and the ordinary business of healing had settled in, Enzo and I finally sat down and looked honestly at what had happened between us. "I owe you an apology," I said, "for Victor, for hiding him from you. I told myself I was protecting Milo, and I was, but I also let you believe our calls were the only place either of us was safe. That wasn't fair to you." "I owe you one as well," Enzo said. "After the verification room, I had you investigated, fully. Your file, your finances, your medical records, everything Confidant refused to give Drago, I obtained within a day." I felt a flash of the old anger, quick and hot. "You crossed the same line you were angry at me for crossing." "I know," he said, and there was no defensiveness in it, only a plain, difficult honesty. "I knew how to destroy my enemies. I have done it many times, and I have never once hesitated. But I did not know how to be afraid for someone without trying to control every variable around her. Investigating you was the only language I had for fear. And I didn't know how to accept help," I said slowly, without immediately looking for the chain attached to it. "Every time you offered something, some part of me was already braced for the cost." "Then we are, both of us," Enzo said, "still learning something we should have learned a long time ago." He made things right in the ways that mattered. My debt to Victor, what remained of it, in the wreckage of his collapsed operation, was erased entirely, not as a gift with strings, but as the simple undoing of a crime that should never have been committed against me in the first place. Milo's medical care was fully secured. Every future appointment, every follow-up, arranged and paid through channels that had nothing to do with me owing anyone anything. Confidant released me from my contract without penalty, citing delicately operational restructuring following the security breach. "You owe me nothing," Enzo told me, the day all of it was finalized, sitting across from me in his study with that same low lamplight from the night I'd told him about the warehouse. "Then why?" I asked. "Are you still here?" He looked at me for a long moment, and something in his face had softened permanently now, in a way I don't think even he had expected it to. "Because at 2:14, he said, "I still want to hear you say hello." I don't remember which of us moved first. I remember his hand finding my jaw, careful, like he was still afraid of breaking something even though I had already proven, over and over, that I wasn't as fragile as he'd once assumed. I remember the kiss being slow, and then not slow at all, years of loneliness on both our parts finally finding somewhere to go. It wasn't the kiss of two strangers. It was the kiss of two people who had already told each other the truth in the dark, long before they ever saw each other's faces. Months later, Milo sat on the terrace of a house on Lake Como with a sketchbook open on his knees, sunlight moving across water so blue it looked painted on. He was drawing, as he did most afternoons now, plans for a children's hospital. Big windows, open courtyards, walls painted the color of sky instead of the color of waiting rooms. "This one has a garden on the roof," he told me, tilting the sketchbook so I could see. "Kids with expensive hearts like fresh air too." "It's beautiful," I said, and meant it. That night at exactly 2:14 a.m., Enzo woke me gently and pressed a phone into my hand. "I want you to hear something," he said. He played a recording, old, slightly warped with age. The audio quality of a call recorded on a device I hadn't known existed until that moment. My own voice, younger and more frightened than I remembered sounding, filled the dark room. "If you really wanted him gone," my own voice said, "you wouldn't be asking a stranger for a reason." I stared at him. "You kept that." "Every call," he said quietly, "from the very first night." Then he did something I never expected from a man who had once ruled entire rooms simply by remaining seated. He knelt. "Every night at 2:14, he said, "I called because your voice made the dark less empty. Then I saw your face, and I learned your courage was never just a sound in my ear. It was a life, a sister who would face wolves for a boy, a woman who protected a man she had every reason to betray, because some part of her still believed he was worth protecting." My eyes were already burning. "I will never own you," he said. "I will never use what you love against you. I will never turn help into ownership again. Not with you. Not with anyone. I will spend the rest of my life proving that power can protect without possessing." He opened a small box. Inside, a ring simple and unshowy in a way I hadn't expected from him, engraved with a single word along the inner band. "Vos. Marry me," he said. "Not because I paid for Milo's surgery. Not because you owe me anything, because you owe me nothing. You have owed me nothing since the day you walked into that warehouse for a boy instead of hiding from me. Marry me because I want you beside me. That's the only reason I have left, and it's the only one that's ever mattered." I looked at this man, the wolf, the boss, the boy underneath all of it who had once been so afraid of becoming a monster that he called a stranger every night at 2:14 just to be reminded he was still capable of choosing kindness. "Yes," I said. Months later, in that same house on the same lake, there was no anonymous line anymore. No booth on the 34th floor. No burner phone hidden in a coat lining. No debt collector waiting outside a building. No hospital bill folded beneath a keyboard. Enzo's hand found mine across the bed in his sleep, the way it always did now. Like even unconscious, he was still reaching for proof that I was real. His phone alarm went off. 2:14. I opened my eyes. "What? Say hello," he said, half asleep, smiling into the dark. I laughed softly. "Hello, Il Lupo." "Hello, Vose," he said, and pulled me closer. He fell in love with my voice in the dark. He saw my face and broke under the truth of what I had been carrying alone. But my secret didn't destroy us. It destroyed the walls he had spent a lifetime building around himself. The lonely mafia boss who once called a stranger every night because he was afraid of becoming a monster finally learned what power was actually for. And the anonymous woman behind the glass finally learned that being protected didn't have to mean being owned. Would you have forgiven Alina for hiding Victor from Enzo? Was Enzo right to feel betrayed when he found that burner phone? And which moment hit you hardest? The face reveal in that white room, Milo threatening a mafia boss with hospital scissors, or the proposal at 2:14? Tell me in the comments. And if this story kept you watching until the very last word, like this video, subscribe for more, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that real love protects without ever needing to possess.